Have you ever felt like the forest was watching you? In 1907, my family moved into a small wooden cabin deep inside the Gracepine Woods, searching for peace. But what we found wasn't silence. It was a gaze, something not human, and yet not beast. That morning, through the fog, my son and I stood frozen, facing dozens of towering creatures. They didn't move. They didn't threaten. They simply watched, with eyes full of intelligence, memory, and something humanity once had and lost. I lived in that forest for over 30 years, and I can tell you, they weren't monsters. They were a community, closer to us than we dare admit. We never took, we traded, and in return they gifted herbs, food, protection. My daughter, Rose, was invited to a world no adult was ever meant to see. Once, I collapsed by the river, alone. But by morning, I woke, bandaged in leaves, lying on cloth not our own. No one saw them, but I knew they had saved me. As a friend, they had saved me. Don't assume you've seen all this world holds. Some things only appear when you respect the silence. But break that bond, and forgiveness will not follow. We moved into the cabin on a Tuesday, early April, while there was still snow clinging to the shaded roots, and the creek hadn't finished thawing. The silence out there was different. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like the kind of quiet that listens, like something waiting. I didn't say that to Mira or the kids. Just brushed the dust off the windows, tightened the latches, told Elias to stack kindling, and showed Sylvie where the pantry trapdoor was. We came out here to start over, to live off the land, not to chase shadows. But still, even while unloading sacks of flour and bundles of linen, I caught myself glancing toward the tree line more than once. The first few days passed without much to say. Mira set up her drying herbs near the wood stove. Sylvie spent hours gathering wildflowers with her little apron stained yellow and green. And Elias followed me every step through the timber lot. He was only 12 but wanted to learn everything. How to trap, track, pack, patch boot soles. How to know when a pine's whisper meant rain. I didn't think much of the forest until the 5th morning. We set out before the sky turned fully blue. The woods still held their breath in frost. Elias walked behind me, quiet and alert, like he knew something was different too. I'd set traps near the ridgeline where the hares moved low, hoping to catch just enough for stew. Clearing opened up like a breath we weren't ready for. They were already there. Not one, not two, more than I could count at first glance. Shadows tall as doorways, standing perfectly still in the fog, their fur blended with the tree bark and moss. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. Some stood at the edge, some half-hidden, others farther back where the morning light just barely reached. My hand instinctively reached behind me for Elias. But he was already frozen. I felt his fingers graze mine. They didn't move, not a growl, not a step, just watching. I could see eyes, reflective but not glowing, faces shadowed beneath brow ridges heavy with time. No two were the same. One had fur so dark it looked wet. Another had patches of red near its arms. They were built like myths, massive, muscular, primal, but the feeling in my gut wasn't fear. It was reverence. They weren't there to threaten. They were bearing witness. We stood like that, maybe seconds, maybe minutes. Then one of them tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, like someone remembering something from a long time ago. And just as calmly as they appeared, they turned and melted back into the woods. I didn't breathe until the clearing emptied. Not because I'd been holding my breath, but because I hadn't realized I needed to. Elias was the first to speak, whispering as if the trees were still listening. "Did you see their eyes?" I nodded. My voice wouldn't come. We walked back in near silence, stepping over roots and ducking branches, the way people do when they've just stumbled into sacred ground. The cabin came into view, smoke curling from the stovepipe. and I felt something shift in my chest, like we'd been seen, not watched. Seen. Mira met us on the porch, hands still dusted with flour. One look at my face and hers went pale. I told her everything. She listened with that quiet steadiness I'd always admired, like a stone warmed by sun. When I finished, she didn't scoff or look away. She just said, "Were they angry?" I shook my head. No. They were aware, like they'd seen us before. That night, the cabin felt different. Not unsafe, just surrounded. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a footstep outside. Every gust of wind across the roof felt like breath, but none of us said it out loud. We just sat closer together by the fire, letting the warmth say what words couldn't. By the third night, I started noticing things. Arrangements in the woods that hadn't been there before. A spiral of river stones laid out just past the trail. Sticks balanced together in strange patterns, too deliberate to be natural. Elias found a clump of fur snagged on the fence post. It was coarse, reddish-brown and long. Mira kept it in a cloth bag on the mantel, without saying why. Sylvie started waking at night. She said the trees were humming. Not scary, she insisted. Just deep and old and slow, like a lullaby from something beneath the roots. The next morning, I found a fish on the steps. A full trout, freshly cleaned, placed gently beside the firewood pile. No bite marks, no claw damage. Just set there like a gesture. I took it inside. Mira salted it without a word. We didn't talk about it with the children, but I think they knew. You can't keep something that big out of the air. It moves like fog, quiet, but everywhere. A few days later, Elias and I went to check the traps again. They were empty, not sprung, just gone. No bait, no sign of struggle, like something had reached in, reset them, and walked away. We stopped setting them after that. We didn't need to be told. The forest had spoken. And we were lucky it had used kindness instead of warning. That evening, after everyone went to sleep, I stood out on the porch in the dark, no lantern, just the cold night and the trees breathing slow. I looked into the blackness and didn't try to spot them. I just said aloud, voice barely more than breath, "We mean no harm." Something moved, maybe a shape, maybe a trick of light, and then silence again. Not empty. Full. Alive. And listening. We weren't alone out here. Not in the way people fear, with monsters and claws in the dark. This was something different. This was being known, and once something like that sees you, you don't go back to being invisible. It didn't leave us. Whatever it was we'd seen in that clearing, it didn't just turn and disappear and forget we existed. It stayed around us, near, quiet, but close enough to feel. The air around the cabin changed, not colder, not heavier, just aware. I'd step outside in the early morning and know, before the sun broke the frost, that something was already watching the clearing. I stopped chopping wood before dawn, stopped singing while working. Even the kids walked softer. There wasn't fear. It was something stranger, like a kind of reverence wrapped in caution, like we'd stumbled into someone else's church and decided to keep our heads down. A few days after that morning in the woods, I caught Mira staring out the window. Not at anything in particular, just listening. She didn't say it, but I knew she felt it too. The change. The quiet that listened back. Then came Rose's moment. It was a Sunday, I think. Midday, bright and warm enough for Mira to wash linens by the creek. She took Rose with her, a basket in one hand, Rose's tiny fingers in the other. I stayed behind with Elias, fixing a shutter that kept slamming in the wind. They were only gone an hour, but something in Mira's face, when they returned, stopped me cold. She didn't speak right away. Just set the basket down and picked a burr out of Rose's hair, like it was any normal day, but she kept glancing at the woods behind her, like something had followed them back. After dinner, she told me. They'd gone near the lower stream bend, past the huckleberry patch. While Mira was rinsing cloth in the cold water, Rose wandered off no more than a few steps. Mira looked up and found her crouched by a rotted log, whispering to something. Not a squirrel, not a raccoon. Something covered in reddish-brown fur, small like Rose, hunched down low and shivering behind the wood. Rose wasn't scared. She was smiling. She'd picked a flower, a daisy, and held it out in her palm. Slowly, gently. Mira said she didn't call out, afraid she'd scare them both. But she crept closer, steady, heart pounding. She saw it clearer then. It wasn't an animal, not like we'd known. It had eyes too wide for its face, too deep, too human. Small nose, soft mouth, but a body like a child built from the forest itself. Ferns in its hair, moss on its hands. Its chest rose and fell fast, like it was caught between the need to flee and the urge to stay. It didn't take the flower, just stared at it. Then it rose, and Mira swore, absolutely swore, that it tilted its head, the same way that one in the clearing had done, like it recognized something. She slowly took Rose's hand, backed away, and they left without a word. I didn't doubt her. Not for a second. That night, we didn't speak loud. Didn't read by lantern. We just sat in the low light, listening to the crackle of the fire, and I watched Rose hum to herself while twisting a new flower into her braid. It kept coming back. We didn't see it, not directly. But things started to appear near the edge of the forest. Small things. Carefully placed. A circle of acorns arranged in a perfect spiral. A pine cone balanced on a stump, pointing toward the house. Once, I found a stone on the porch, smooth and round, with 3 lines carved across its surface, like marks from a child's fingertip. Elias said it looked like a gift, so we gave one back. A piece of jerky, left on the log by the huckleberry patch. Gone the next morning. Then a cup of spring water. Then a blue ribbon from Mira's sewing basket. And every single time, we found something in return. A woven bunch of wild thyme. A feather braided with dried grass. A flat stone painted with crushed berries in the shape of a sun. We didn't know who was doing it. But we started calling the little one Rose saw. Button. It fit. Elias said the name just came to him in a dream, like someone whispered it. Sometimes at dusk, when the fog crept low and the birds went quiet, I'd see movement in the corner of my eye. Behind the same tree, near the same log, small, watching, but never closer, and still, no fear, no threat. Just the strange comfort of knowing we weren't as alone as we thought. I saw Rose one morning sitting cross-legged in the yard, humming a song I didn't recognize. Her voice was soft, lilting, not a nursery tune. It was older, slower. I stood behind her for minutes, not interrupting, just listening. A branch cracked behind the shed. She stopped. Some things you just believe. And I think that was the first time I realized this wasn't just a meeting. It was a beginning. A door left ajar between our world and theirs, and somehow our children had been the ones brave enough to knock first. That night, before bed, I found a line of small pebbles leading from the porch to the woods. And at the end, near the tree line, a single flower tucked into the crook of a root, a daisy. I picked it up and held it in my hand, still warm from the earth. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't afraid. Something had come closer. And I think in its own way, it was waiting for us to come closer too. There are certain sounds you never forget. The snap of dry grass under small feet. The hush of a breath that doesn't belong to yours. The way the wind suddenly stops mid-song, like the forest's holding its breath. That morning was full of those sounds. Rose had been humming all the way down the ridge, her basket swinging on her arm, Mira walking just a few steps behind. They were headed for the lower meadow, where the wild flowers grow thick in spring, where the creek bends soft and sunlit, and the moss grows in thick velvet patches over old stones. I stayed behind that day, fixing the fence where something had torn through the wire the night before. Not violently, but deliberately, like clearing a path. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe I should. I heard them come back an hour later. The screen door creaking open slow like Mira was trying not to wake something. When I turned, her eyes found mine instantly. She looked pale, unsettled, but not afraid. Just shaken in a way I hadn't seen since the day we lost the baby, years back. When she'd gone quiet for days, carrying grief like a stone in her lungs. She didn't say anything, just set the basket down on the table, touched Rose's head, and went to the sink. Rose climbed onto her stool like it was just another afternoon and started drawing with a stub of charcoal on the side of a wood scrap. It wasn't until night fell and the kids were asleep that Mira spoke. She told me what happened. How they'd been picking daisies and clover when Rose wandered a few feet from the trail. Just a few feet. Mira had looked up and seen her crouched low near a fallen log, whispering into the brush. At first, she thought it was a rabbit. Then she saw the fur. Not rabbit. Not deer. Not any animal we knew. It was small, maybe the size of Rose herself, tucked behind the mossy curve of the log, back pressed to the wood like it was trying to disappear. Covered in matted reddish fur, hands small, shaking. But Rose wasn't scared. She was smiling. She had picked a daisy and held it out. Not thrust. Not offered like a child shows off a bug. Just held it. Steady and kind, like the way she offers me her drawings when she's unsure I'll understand. Mira said the little creature didn't move, didn't take it. But it didn't run either. It watched. Its eyes shifted, slow and curious. It looked at the flower, then at Rose, then back again. And Mira swears it tilted its head, like it was trying to figure her out. Like it was trying to decide if the daisy meant danger or invitation. She didn't interrupt. Just crept forward quietly, scooped Rose into her arms and backed away. She didn't run, didn't speak. Just nodded, like saying thank you without words, and walked back. I asked her what it looked like. She paused, then whispered something that stuck to my ribs. It looked aware, not wild, not feral, not mindless. Aware. After that, things changed. Rose began sitting by the window more often, watching the trees like she was waiting for someone. Sometimes she'd leave a single flower on the porch railing, never explaining why. Other times she'd hum that same tune I couldn't place, soft and breathy, like it didn't belong to her. One evening, I caught a glimpse of movement near the creek. A small figure, crouched low, watching the cabin from behind a cluster of saplings. I didn't go after it. I just watched it watching us, until it sank back into the trees like mist rolling off a pond. We started calling it Button. Not out loud at first. It just slipped into conversation between Mira and me, like the name had always belonged to something in our lives. And strangely, it fit. Small, fragile, intentional. A piece holding everything together without ever demanding to be noticed. Button never came close, but we knew it was there. Rose would tap 3 times on the porch rail and whisper something, then walk away. Later, we'd find small gifts, a bundle of birch bark tied with grass, a rock that sparkled faintly in the right light, a tiny ring of woven vines, too delicate to be made by accident. One morning, Elias found a pattern of pebbles near the well. Circles, spirals, marks that didn't match any animal trail. He bent down and touched one. Then, without a word, walked back inside and drew it in his journal. I noticed that Button mirrored Rose's movements. When she tilted her head, it would too. When she danced, arms swinging awkwardly through the tall grass, there'd be a faint flicker of movement behind the trees. Not threatening, just echoing. It was like watching 2 children on opposite sides of a window, trying to teach each other how to be understood. Sometimes I wondered what Button's family thought of all this. Did they watch from deeper in the forest, unseen? Did they allow this strange friendship? Or was it something forbidden even among them? I'd never seen any others come near. Not yet. But at night, I'd hear the soft crunch of weight through leaves, too heavy for a deer, too light for anything else. We began leaving small things by the edge of the woods. A sliver of salted fish, a handful of berries, a button from Mira's sewing box. Every time they disappeared. And in return we found feathers, smooth stones, braided grass. Not taken, traded. There were no words exchanged, no voices, no promises, just trust. And trust, I've learned, is always the first language of friendship. One dusk, as the sky melted orange and the trees turned black, I saw Button standing a little closer than usual. Rose was inside, humming to herself while brushing her doll's hair. I stood on the porch, hands in my pockets, not moving, not breathing heavy. Button raised one hand. Just a little. Not waving, not beckoning. Just acknowledgement. Then turned and vanished behind the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that daisy. That little gesture in the clearing. Sometimes, all it takes is a child offering a flower to remind something ancient that not all humans are to be feared. Sometimes, a gesture that small opens a door too wide to close. And now that it's open, something deeper is beginning to stir. We never sat down and said it out loud, but at some point, we became part of a conversation that didn't use words. Every morning, I'd walk the same path along the southern edge of the tree line with a bundle of something in my hand. Smoked venison, a slice of bread, a bit of cloth Mira had stitched. And every evening there would be something left in its place. A stone, polished smooth. A wild herb I didn't recognize. Once, a small crown made of twined willow and bird feathers, fragile and damp with morning dew. It was never left in the same spot. Sometimes near the chicken coop, sometimes resting on the porch railing, sometimes just inside the woods where the light began to die. Always intentional, always quiet. There's a rhythm you fall into with that kind of silence. The way you walk slower, listen harder. I began to notice how the air shifted when Button was near. I could feel it, like static in my skin, like the forest held its breath when it watched me. Mira felt it too. She moved differently through the garden, her hands softer with the soil. Elias stopped whistling when he worked, started mimicking bird calls instead. Even the animals around the cabin acted calmer. The fox that used to dart across our fields now sat and stared at us from a distance. The chickens laid more regularly. The dog, old and mostly blind, never barked at night anymore. But Rose, she glowed. She and Button had found their rhythm. Some afternoons I'd catch her sitting on a tree stump near the creek, her doll lying beside her, and she'd be nodding and humming, swaying just enough to know she wasn't alone. And sometimes I'd see it, just barely, a shift in the shadows beyond her. Button crouched low behind the brush, mimicking the way Rose tilted her head or tapped her fingers in the dirt. They never touched, but they moved like a pair of ghosts who had agreed not to scare each other. One evening, Elias started humming to himself as he filled the water buckets, and I heard a faint whistle echo his tune from the trees. He froze, looked at me. I just nodded. We all knew by then. It was something we didn't talk about in full, not because we were hiding it from each other, but because the words felt too small to carry it. The kids would draw things on scraps of wood. I'd find Mira standing still in the garden, holding a bunch of dried sage in her hands like it was a prayer. We weren't living with the forest anymore. We were living inside something larger than ourselves. And then the gifts started changing. They weren't just things anymore. They were messages. One morning, Mira found a bundle of cedar tied with bark on the porch. Tucked inside was a sprig of meadowsweet and a single blue stone shaped like a teardrop. She said nothing for the rest of the day, just kept glancing at the woods like it had whispered something she wasn't ready to repeat. Later that night, she told me the bundle matched something her grandmother used to hang above cradles for protection. Not a coincidence, not chance. I found a fish laid out near the coop, not just caught, but cleaned. Scaled, gutted. No tooth marks, no blood, no prints around it. just a perfect trout, glistening like it had been caught 5 minutes ago. I brought it inside, washed it, and wrapped it in cloth, then placed it back on the stump where I left the jerky the day before. The next morning, the fish was gone, and in its place was a perfect ring of clover. They were listening, watching, learning us the way we were trying to learn them. I started keeping a small notebook by my bed, sketching what I found, what I gave, what I felt. Not facts, feelings, temperature. The angle of the sun, whether the birds had gone quiet or not, whether the leaves had curled in or out. I wasn't tracking for science. I was trying to hear a rhythm, something deeper. That's when the dreams started. Not nightmares, not visions, just visits. I'd wake in the middle of the night with the feeling that something had been watching me through the window. And instead of fear, I felt a pull. Not danger. Invitation. Some mornings, I'd find prints near the woodpile. Huge, but not heavy. Not dug in like a predator. More like a careful step, a polite presence. And then came the day I saw Button try to sing. Rose was on the porch, her knees swinging back and forth, humming a tune I hadn't heard before. Something soft, ancient, almost. Mira was inside with Elias, and I was repairing the axe handle near the shed. I looked up because something in the air went still, and there it was. Just beyond the tree line, hunched low. Button, head swaying, hands tapping against its knees like trying to find the beat. It made a sound, not a song, not a hum. More like a vibration, deep and breathy. Not from its throat, but from somewhere deeper. It tried to match Rose's rhythm, tried to rise and fall with her melody. And for one moment, it worked. Two sounds from two beings, separated by trees and silence and centuries, came into sync. Then it stopped. Button ducked low and vanished. But Rose, she just kept humming, like she already knew the forest had found its voice. Later that night, I found a charm on the porch. A bundle of small twigs tied in a triangle with thread I didn't recognize. In the center, a tiny bird skull, bleached white and clean. I held it in my hand, felt the weight of it. It didn't frighten me. It felt like a sign, a symbol, something left behind when words don't work anymore. We were in it now, whatever it was, a dance, a bond, an understanding that we couldn't name but didn't dare disturb. The kids didn't ask questions. They just started living as if Button was part of the world, like the wind or the rain or the stars. Constant, quiet, known. And I started to feel it too, in the way the fire popped louder at night, in the smell of pine that clung longer in the air, in the way the shadows leaned toward the cabin like they wanted to come closer, but were waiting for permission. One morning, I found a ring of stones around the porch steps, not just placed, but arranged. Each stone different, each one clean. Deliberate. I didn't step over them. I walked around. Some lines aren't meant to be broken, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just living near the edge of the forest. I was being welcomed in. It started with the smell of smoke where there shouldn't have been any, a thin, bitter scent drifting in through the pines, riding on a still wind, sharp enough to burn the back of my throat before I even saw it. I was down by the fence line, replacing a broken rail when it hit me. Pine tar, steel, and ash. Not our fire, not our kindling, not even from our direction. Something was burning beyond the ridge. I stood up slow, scanned the tree line. Nothing obvious. But the birds had gone quiet, not in that natural lull between songs. Gone, like they'd flown off and didn't look back. I walked back to the cabin, boots crunching louder than usual, and by the time I made it to the porch, Mira was already out front, arms crossed tight, eyes narrowed toward the south tree line. She smelled it too. She didn't ask. She just nodded once, and I knew what she meant. Someone else was here. That night I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what it meant when the forest shifts like that. Something had entered it that didn't belong. Something loud. Something blind. And worse, something looking for something it didn't understand. We heard the truck the next morning. I knew that engine note. An old flatbed Ford with a suspension creak you could hear through bone. Hunters. Not locals. Not the kind who respected the land. You could hear it in the way they slammed their doors, shouted over the birds, let their boots crash through underbrush like it owed them something. I didn't go out to meet them, but I watched from the ridge. 3 men, maybe 4, stomping through the clearing like they owned it. One held a map upside down. Another carried a scoped rifle that had never seen dust. Weekend warriors, outsiders, the kind who shoot at movement before they know what it is. They were laughing. I remember that part most. Loud, broken laughter that bounced off the trees and came back hollow. Elias saw them too. He stood beside me. Didn't say a word. Just clenched his fists around the fence post, so tight his knuckles went white. He looked older in that moment. Harder. I hated that for him. That evening, the woods felt like glass. Too still. Too brittle. Even Button didn't show. No feathers on the porch. No rocks. No gifts. Just a silence thick as wet wool. We didn't talk much at dinner. Mira kept glancing at the windows. Rose barely touched her food. Elias sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing against the cabin, like it was trying to hold its breath with us. And then the screaming started. I don't mean panic. I don't mean fear. I mean something wild and furious and human cracking open at the seams. It came from deep in the south woods, somewhere near where we'd seen the hunters. One long, guttural yell that twisted into a kind of choking roar. Then another voice shouting. Then silence again. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, there was no trace of them. No truck, no smoke. But when I walked the southern trail, I saw where the earth had been torn up. Boot prints. Deep. Frenzied. Blood on the bark of a young birch. A spent casing under the brambles. And one more thing. A ring of stones. 12 of them. Perfectly spaced in a circle. Not touching. Each one blackened like they'd been in a fire. In the center, a branch snapped clean in half. That's when I knew. The forest had drawn a line, not out of malice, out of warning. And the men had crossed it. We didn't see any of them again. But we didn't see Button either. Not for days. No sign. No gifts. The silence changed. Not stillness anymore. Suspicion. Hurt. Like something had cracked between us that couldn't be fixed with feathers or stones. I felt it most at night. I'd step outside and feel the forest pull back, like it didn't trust me anymore. Like it couldn't tell if I was still on the right side of the line. The wind no longer touched the porch. The air smelled of old smoke and wet moss. Even the dog refused to go past the yard. So I carved the tree. It was an old cedar, just past the garden, roots thick like ropes, bark already scarred by time. I took my hunting knife and scratched the words in deep, slow strokes. No hunting-protected wood. I didn't know who would read it. Maybe no one. Maybe only the forest. But it felt right. That night, I left a satchel on the stump. Inside was my old compass, the one my father gave me when I turned 12. I hadn't used it in years. The needle stuck. But it had guided me once. Maybe it could do it again. The next morning, it was gone. In its place was a handful of ash and a single bird feather. Bright blue, untouched, clean. Rose found it first. She didn't ask what it meant. She just tied it to her braid and said, "They're watching again? I believed her." Elias started drawing more. Sketches of tall figures behind trees. Circles of fire. Eyes glowing low to the ground. Mira wrote letters she never sent. Kept them folded in the Bible on the mantel. I never asked what they said. I think I knew they were apologies. And every morning I walked the tree line. Sometimes I saw movement, sometimes not. But I always said the same words out loud, just once, just barely louder than breath. We're still here, and I hoped that meant something. I should have noticed sooner that Rose wasn't in the yard. It was late afternoon, just as the shadows started crawling out from under the trees and laying long over the grass. The light was golden, still warm on the skin, and Mira was kneading bread in the kitchen while Elias read by the fireplace, legs sprawled across the floor like always. The cabin felt steady again for the first time in weeks. The silence wasn't heavy, it was soft, like maybe we were being forgiven. But when I stepped onto the porch and called Rose's name, the woods didn't answer. Her boots were still beside the door. The small pair with the buttons she made herself from twine and beads. Her jacket hung on the hook, and the daisy chain she'd braided that morning lay forgotten on the railing. I don't remember grabbing the lantern. I just remember the cold that took hold of my chest as I crossed the clearing. I called her again, this time louder, voice cracking on the second syllable. No birds, no wind, just the creak of old branches under the weight of silence that didn't belong. Mira came out behind me, wiping flour from her hands, her eyes searching the tree line with a mother's instinct that never needed words. And then Elias was beside us, already pulling on his boots. We didn't talk. We just ran through the fern beds, across the mossed-over trail that led past the east bend of the stream, up where the ridge dipped and the roots reached out like hands trying to trip you. I shouted until my voice was raw. Mira called with a voice I hadn't heard in years, sharper than fear, older than panic. Then we saw it. A glow. Not fire. Something else. Soft, pulsing, came from deep past the trees, through a part of the forest none of us had ever dared to cross. We followed. No hesitation, no logic, just a pull, like a current that had finally come to claim us. And then we stepped into the circle. I don't even know how to describe it. There was no clearing, no boundary line, just this sudden stillness, this breathless center of something alive. The trees opened slightly, not wide, just enough to form a rough ring. And in the center were shapes, dozens of them, Bigfoot. Not just one, not just Button, a full gathering. Some seated, some crouched, some standing so still I thought they were carved from tree trunks. And in the middle, kneeling on a bed of leaves, was Rose, calm, unharmed, her eyes wide but not afraid, her hands resting gently in her lap like she was listening to something ancient and sacred. They hadn't taken her. She'd gone on her own, and they had let her in. Mira dropped to her knees. Elias froze in place. I stepped forward, but only barely, because the moment I moved, all eyes turned toward me, not threatening, not welcoming, just watching. I could see their faces now, not hidden in brush or fog or shadow. They were different, some older fur going gray in patches, some young, their frames smaller, their movements cautious. But they were all built with a kind of gravity I couldn't explain, like they belonged to the earth in a way we never had. One of them, taller than the others, shoulders like boulders, eyes so deep they looked hollow, stepped forward. Slow. Deliberate. He knelt beside Rose and placed something in her hands. A stone, polished, dark green. She looked at it, then looked back at him, then back at us. And I knew. Somehow, I knew. This was a rite, not a ritual in the way humans perform them with chants or fire or words, but a recognition, a gesture, a bridge. I didn't speak. None of us did. The figures around the ring moved again, not toward us, but toward each other. One passed food to another. Two knelt and began rubbing clay into bark. A small one rolled a gourd across the moss. There was laughter. Not loud, not human, but warm. They weren't beasts. They were a family, a community, a people. The stories had always made them out to be monsters, myths, threats in the trees. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was quieter, more beautiful, more human than we wanted to believe. I felt something shift in me. All the fear, the confusion, the need for answers. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they had invited her into something sacred, and by doing so they had invited all of us. When Rose stood and walked back toward us, no one followed. No one stopped her. She stepped over the moss like it was a threshold, and when she reached me, she looked up and said, "They wanted to show me who they are." I couldn't speak. I just held her. The forest didn't close behind us. It stayed open. For minutes, hours, I don't know. I only remember the light beginning to change. The gold fading into blue. The shapes blending back into the bark. And then the glow was gone. But I knew it was still there, waiting. That night, Rose placed the green stone on the mantel, right beside the compass I'd given away. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. We all sat by the fire, no one speaking, just listening. Not to the wind, not to the forest, to the echo of something we now belonged to. And even though we'd left the circle, I don't think we ever really came back. It happened in the quiet, not the kind of quiet that comforts you, not the kind that settles between tree trunks at dusk, but the kind that drips into your bones like cold water, too still to be natural. I'd gone down to the river alone that morning. Just needed space, I think. Sometimes, even in the middle of peace, your chest carries an ache you can't name, and the only way to soften it is to walk straight into the woods and let the trees take some of it from you. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the light was soft, and the mist curled off the water like breath. I sat near the flat stones where the creek bends around the roots of that old sycamore, the one with the scar across its trunk, like it had once been split by lightning. I crouched there with a tin mug, letting the current fill it slowly, watching leaves drift by in the reflection like forgotten thoughts. I don't remember hearing the rock slip. Maybe I did. Maybe I ignored it. But I remember the weightlessness. My feet gave first, then the rest of me. The bank was slick from the rain the night before. I fell hard, down into the side, my shoulder hitting a root with a crack that sounded worse than it felt. But the pain came quickly after. Sharp, white, like lightning striking inside the bone. My head snapped back, eyes filling with sky and branches, then nothing. When I woke, the sky had changed. It was darker than it should have been. My body ached everywhere, but especially the leg, twisted under me at a wrong angle. And my arm throbbed as if it were filled with broken glass. I couldn't move. Couldn't shout loud enough. The river murmured beside me like it didn't know I was there. The forest didn't answer. And then I saw it. Not the face, just the shape. Broad shoulders, tall silhouette against the trees. Still, watching. For a moment I thought it was my mind playing tricks. Pain makes people see things, but then it moved, closer, slow, like it was trying not to frighten me. I blinked, and it was kneeling. The air smelled like pine and wet bark. Its hand reached out, not rough or rushed, but careful, like handling something delicate. I flinched. I couldn't help it. The pain surged up my side, and I let out a sound I didn't mean to. It didn't pull away. Instead, it took something from a pouch. Leaves, dark and thick, maybe crushed herbs. It pressed them gently against my leg. And then silence again. A different kind. Like something sacred had entered the air. I looked up into its face, and it looked back with eyes that didn't blink the way we do. Not threatening, not warm, just present, deep. Then it was gone. I must have passed out again, because when I opened my eyes next, I was back near the cabin, not on the porch, not inside, just on the edge of the clearing, right by the woodpile. My head was resting on a rolled jacket. My leg had been set, not perfectly, but better than I'd left it, and the ache in my ribs had dulled. Wrapped in fabric I didn't recognize. Mira came running the second she saw. She dropped to her knees, hands shaking, whispering my name over and over like saying it might anchor me back into the world. She kept asking what happened. I couldn't explain it, not because I didn't remember, but because there was no way to say it that wouldn't undo the silence it had left behind. The kind of silence that should never be filled with too many words. Later that night, I found something tucked beside the steps, a bundle of leaves wrapped with vines, still damp, still smelling of something medicinal. Next to it was a single strand of bark, curled and smooth, with a pattern etched into it. 3 circles, overlapping, like ripples in water. I showed it to Mira. She traced it with her finger, quiet, then set it gently on the mantel. We didn't speak much for the next few days. But something had changed, not just in my bones, though I walked slower after that. Something deeper, as if the forest had stepped past its border and decided it was time we knew what it meant to be cared for. Not watched, not studied, cared for. Elias said he'd seen a figure standing at the edge of the clearing one night. Not moving, not moving, not leaving, just there. As if it had come to make sure I was still breathing. I believed him. Rose sat with me every morning, didn't ask questions. Just brought a book, or her doll, or sometimes nothing at all. And one morning she said, "They don't like to see hurt, but they know how to help it." And I don't know how she knew, but I felt it too. After that, we changed things. No more axes left leaning against the tree. No more nails in the fence line. We pulled the traps from storage and buried them. Mira planted more herbs near the edge of the woods, not to harvest, just to grow. A sign, an offering. Elias carved a small totem from driftwood, painted it with charcoal and berries, and placed it on the stump near the old trail. A week later, we found another beside it, not made by us, taller, smoother, older, but clearly left there in answer. The forest had never been tamed. We knew that now. It didn't want to be owned, but it could be respected. And respect, like kindness, grows in layers. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and hear the sound of water dripping from high branches, and I think about that moment down by the creek, the weight of helplessness, the silence of being seen and not saved, but lifted, not taken, but returned. Healed in the only way they knew how. And I know this much. There are hands out there that don't look like ours, but still reach. There are eyes in the dark that don't close when we fall. And there is something older than language that binds us when we let it. We had crossed over, and now they had crossed back. The cabin stood longer than I ever expected it to. Years passed in the way they do when you're not watching. Slow as a branch growing, fast as a fire starting. I used to mark time by the harvest, by the seasons, by how high the snow piled against the back steps. Later, I marked it by how tall Elias grew, how Rose's voice deepened from a child's song into something quieter, steadier. Eventually, I stopped marking it at all. What stayed with me more than anything was how the forest never forgot us. Even when the children left, Elias to work with maps and timber downstate, Rose to teach stories to children who needed to believe in more than what they could see. The woods remembered. The offerings didn't stop, just changed. No more feathers tied in grass. No fish laid gently on the steps. Instead, we'd find signs of care. Branches cleared from paths before storms hit. A sapling guarded by stones we never placed. Or once, a stack of firewood we hadn't chopped, arranged under the eaves on a night the temperature dropped too fast. Prepare. There was one winter, long after Mira passed, when I sat out front for nearly 3 hours watching the tree line. My breath clouded the air in slow spirals. My hands trembled not from cold, but from something deeper, something too big for language. The light was almost gone, the last orange bleeding into black when I saw it. Not Button, not any face I knew, just a figure, larger still. There was no movement, no sound, just presence. And I swear to you, it nodded. That was enough. I never told the children everything. Some of it they lived themselves, and some of it wasn't mine to give away. This story, it was always more like a circle than a line. Not something with a beginning or an end, but something that continues, expands, echoes. I kept the compass on the mantle, though the needle still sticks. The green stone from the circle still sits beside it. The bark charm with the 3 circles, still tucked behind Mira's dried herbs. No dust on them. I never let dust settle there when I grew too old to tend the garden or patch the roof. The forest stepped closer again. A vine climbed the cabin wall, not invasive, just gentle, wrapping itself around the window like a hand resting on a shoulder. Birds nested in the porch rafters. Small animals slept near the edge of the firewood pile. I stopped scaring them off. I began sleeping with the windows open, even in the cold. I liked the sounds. Wind through the branches, leaves shifting like breath. That low rhythm in the ground you only hear when your bones get quiet enough. One morning, I woke and found a ring of river stones laid near the back fence. Smooth, clean, no footprints, just the stones. One of them had a red string tied loosely around it. I sat beside them for a long time, thinking about the first time I saw eyes watching me from the mist, the first daisy in Rose's hand, the fire I never lit that night. The hunters disappeared. We had never signed anything, never said a word, but the pact held. Mutual care, silent agreement, respect. And then came the day I couldn't rise from the bed. My joints locked, my chest was shallow. The sky outside the window had turned a soft gray, the kind that comes before the rain. I knew the time was near. I asked Elias to bring me to the ridge, where it all began. He didn't hesitate. Rose arrived the next day. She brought a bundle wrapped in flannel, the same red pattern Mira used to sew. Inside were small things. Her notes, my journal. A pressed daisy she said she'd kept since she was 6. They carried me down to the clearing. We didn't say much on the way. The wind was gentle. The path seemed smoother than it ever had. I think even the trees leaned back a little to make room. We reached the place. The same place. The clearing where we had first been seen, not as threats, not as prey, but as something worth watching. The stones still circled it. Faded now, moss-covered, but present. I felt the weight of memory in the dirt. They laid me down near the old sycamore. Its scar still ran along its trunk, but new growth had wrapped itself around it, turning what was once a wound into something living. We stayed there for a while. Elias sat beside me, hands folded in his lap. Rose walked the edge of the clearing in slow steps, whispering to the trees. Then we heard it. A soft sound, not footsteps, not wind, but something close, a presence, watching, not threatening, just witnessing, like it had before. I closed my eyes and breathed in. It smelled of pine, wet soil, a touch of fire long burned out, and something else, something old. Something that had always been here, and I knew. When the time came, I wouldn't be alone. They would carry me, like they had once before, not away, but home, and the forest would remember, because we had remembered it. Some stories don't really end. They don't wrap up neatly with answers or conclusions. Instead, they linger, quietly, settling into that soft, wordless place inside us where memory and emotion meet. The story you've just heard is one of those, not simply about a family or the beings who watch them from the forest shadows, but about something more universal, something we've all longed for, whether we admit it or not. The feeling of being truly seen, even without ever saying a word. The comfort of being understood, even in silence. In the rush of daily life, we forget that we're still living on a planet that listens. Trees still rise to greet the morning sky. The earth still remembers the weight of every quiet footstep. And sometimes, the most extraordinary moments don't come from finding explanations, but from learning to live with mystery, with humility, with reverence. This story, this forest, these beings, whether you believe in them or not, remind us that compassion isn't just a human trait. It can wear any form. It can move through fur-covered hands setting herbs by a stranger's side. It can speak through circles of stone and feathers left without a name. Some souls don't use words. They don't need to. And if we're quiet enough, open enough, they just might speak to us too. Maybe we're all walking through a forest of our own, carrying grief, carrying questions, trying to make sense of paths that curve without warning. But even in that quiet, if we dare to open our hearts instead of closing our fists, we might just find a clearing, a beginning, a circle that has been waiting for us all along. This story doesn't ask you to believe. It simply invites you to feel. And if something in your chest stirred while listening, no matter how small, I hope you'll leave a comment below. A thought, a memory, even an unanswered question. Because someone else, somewhere, might need to know they're not alone either. Thank you for walking with us to the very edge of this story. And if you, like us, believe that not everything has to be explained to be real, that some truths live in quiet places, follow the channel. Let's keep sharing the stories that live just beyond the edges of what we know. Because maybe the next one will be yours.